After studying this module, you would be able to understand foreign trade policy, learn about foreign trade policy and economic development, learn about evolution of India's trade policy, know the major feature of foreign trade policy 2009-2014. Today, international trade is the driving force for the development of the advanced countries. It not only facilitates the exchange of goods and services between countries, but it acts as a backbone of increasingly independent worldwide network of investment, production and technology. World trade is increasing at a very fast rate with the increase in the international organizations like WTO, ASEAN, UNCTAD, etc. It is very necessary that the government lays down some rules and regulations in order to regulate export and imports in the desired action. Various advanced countries like US, Germany, Japan and others use their trade policy to promote their export and to restrict their imports. Thus, trade policies plays a pivotal role in encouraging countries' foreign trade and creating favorable balance of payment position. Let us understand what is meant by the foreign trade policy. The foreign trade policy is a framework that gives direction to the export and imports of a country. It is also called export-import policy. It is a policy statement that spells out in a clear terms of the policy of the government to external trade comprising export and imports, merchandise and services, the measure to promote export and the means and ways to curb unnecessary imports. Such policy is important for the developing countries like India as it influences countries' external trade and balance of payment. For example, liberalization of imports put Indian firms under pressure to minimize cost and enhance quality in order to remain competitive in the international market. Similarly, export augmentation measures have generated new opportunity for the firms that are willing to sell their goods and services abroad. The growth of the business firms can be promoted through liberal foreign trade policy. In India, foreign trade policy is announced by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry of the Government of India for the 5-year period. The objective of this policy is to promote export, encouraging foreign trade and generating favorable balance of payment position. Let us understand the nexus between the foreign trade policy and economic development. It is very normal and desirable for the countries to trade. This is due to the fact that natural resources are not evenly distributed on the earth. And also, since developed countries spend substantially on the research and development, the less developed countries are forced to buy new products from the developed countries. Whatever be the reason, foreign trade policy is very significant for the economic development of the countries. Through foreign trade policy, developing countries get to know about the development of developed countries. This creates urge in the developing countries to expand their knowledge and experience. By this, the developing countries focuses on the factors that makes the development possible. For the developmental purposes, a country requires various machinery and equipments. During initial stages of the development, these machineries and equipments cannot be produced and are required to be imported. Such import of machinery and equipment that helps in the development of the country are called developmental imports. Due to the foreign trade policy of a country, the developmental imports are possible. In order to properly utilize the capacity created in the country, a developing country requires the import of the raw material and intermediate goods. Such imports are called maintenance imports. Such imports are also very essential for developing country, otherwise various industrial projects can be struck up in between because of the lack of the maintenance imports. In order to reduce the scarcity of the consumer goods, a developing economy is also required to import consumer goods. Such imports are called anti-inflationary imports. For example, in India, in post-independence period, there was import of food grains that helped to arrest the rise of the price at home. The inflow of the foreign technology, skills, tastes and experiences considerably influences the production, marketing, lifestyle and level of living of the people of the domestic country. Let us know the evolution of the India's trade policy. In the beginning, India's trade policy was geared to achieve self-reliance through import substitution. The whole focus was on preserving the scarce foreign exchange resources and the policy was rigidly restrictive. But the policy of the government was not too harsh towards the exports. Exports were allowed and encouraged in order to earn precious foreign exchange. This inward policy of India continued till 1991 because it is not possible for a country to think of only export without having import. There had been substantial liberalization of the trade policy after 1991. India's foreign trade policy is one of the outward looking from 1991 onwards. The evolution of India's trade policy has been discussed as: first, trade policy in the post-independence period. In India, in the post-independence period, the focus is on achieving the economic self-reliance. Economic self-reliance means minimizing or eliminating the dependence on the foreign aid. It was felt that since all forms of external assistance creates unnecessary outside interference and pressure on the country's economic policy and development programs, it should be minimized or eliminated. It is possible only when the imports in a country are paid from the resources generated through its exports. Therefore, in India, it was decided to pursue a policy or vigorously promoting exports along with the drastically limiting the imports. Thus, it was felt that the vigorous export promotion along with the import restrictions will help the country to achieve economic self-reliance and thereby eliminating any need for the foreign trade. Second, import substitution. Ever since the mid-1950s, import substitution formed an integral part of India's foreign policy. Import substitution means replacing the imported goods by the domestically produced goods. The import substitution strategy had twofold objectives. Firstly, by reducing the import of goods, it had been tried to save the scarce foreign exchange. The saved foreign exchange was only required to be used for the developmental imports, critical materials and sophisticated technology. Secondly, creating the restrictions on the quantity of the goods imported will help the market and demand to be enlarged for the domestically produced goods. Thus, from the beginning, India adopted an inward-looking developmental strategy. Under this policy regime, there were heavy regulations on the foreign trade policy. By these rigid controls and regulations, it was tried to save the scarce foreign exchange along with ensuring that the domestic industry will not suffer competition from the imported goods. However, these highly restrictive trade policy proved to be counterproductive. Third, towards trade liberalization. In order to ensure some stability and remove uncertainty arising out of the year-to-year changes, in April 1985, the government introduced that now onwards the foreign trade policy will cover a period of 3 years. In July 1991, major liberalization of foreign trade policy came. Devaluation of rupee, abolition of import licensing on the majority of goods, replacement of the cash subsidy to the exporter by partial convertibility of the rupee, etc. were the major components of this policy reform. The tariff rates were substantially reduced and the role of quantitative restrictions were minimized in the trade policy changes in the post-1991 period. Let us discuss the Foreign Trade Policy 2009-2014 in detail. The purpose of the trade is not only to earn foreign exchange, but to stimulate economic growth and national development. The foreign trade policy of India is built around two major objectives, which are given below. First, to ensure double increase in the country's share of the global merchandise trade within next 5 years. Second, to act as an essential device of the economic growth by giving an impetus to employment generation. Foreign Trade Policy 2009-2014. In order to meet these objectives, foreign trade policy came into the force in August 2009. Major features. First, market diversification. The growth of India's export has pulled down due to the inadequate demand in the developed nations. To save Indian exports, the focus is on diversification of Indian exports to other markets, especially those of Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia and Oceania. The following measures have taken to diversify Indian exports. Addition of 26 new countries under Focus Market Scheme. Extension of incentives provided under Focus Market Scheme from 2.5% to 3%. Market-linked Focus Product Scheme has been expanded to more markets and products. Second, technological upgradation. A number of initiatives have taken to encourage technological upgradation of export sectors. These are introduction of EPCG scheme at zero duty for engineering and electronic products, apparels and textiles, chemicals and pharmaceuticals, handicrafts, plastic and leather. A minimum 15% value addition on imported inputs under Advanced Authorization Scheme has specified. Third, EPCG relaxation. Reduction of the export obligation on import of spares, molds under EPCG to 50% of the normal specific export obligation. Extension of the facility of refixation of annual average export obligation for a specific year in which exports are declined. Fourth, support to the status holders. To increase exports, additional duty credit scrips has granted to status holders at the rate of 1% of the FOB value of the past exports. Capital goods can be procured with the help of these duty credit scrips. This policy allowed for a transfer of duty credit scrips being issued to the status holder. But this can be transferred only to the status holder and can be used only to procure cold chain equipments. Fifth, stability or continuity of the foreign trade policy. Extension of the duty entitlement passbook by a year till December 31st, 2010 to impart stability to policy regime. Extension of interest subvention of 2% for the pre-shipment credit for 7 sectors till 31st March 2010. Extension of income tax exemption of 100% to EOUs and to STPI units under Income Tax Act for financial year 2010-2011. Extension of the Adjustment Assistance Scheme initiated in December 2008 till March 2010 to provide enhanced ECGC cover at 95% to the sector which has adversely affected. Sixth, EOUs. A permission to EOUs to sell products produced by them in DTA up to a limit of 90% instead of 75% without changing the criteria of similar goods within the overall entitlement of 50% of DTA sale. EOUs are allowed to buy finished goods in order to consolidate with their manufactured goods subject to certain safeguards. Seventh, agricultural sector. A single window system has introduced to reduce handling and transaction cost so that export of the perishable agricultural produce becomes easier. In this system, a number of multifunctional nodal agencies to be accredited by the Agricultural and Processed Food Products Export Development Authority were set up. 8. Leather sector. Re-export of inappropriate imported material such as raw hides and skins and wet blue leather is allowed. Leather sector is permitted to re-export unsold hide skins and semi-finished leather from the public bonded warehouses at 50% applicable export duty. FPS rate is increased to 2% in order to provide benefit to the leather sector. 9th, tea. Reduction of minimum value addition from 100% to 50% under Advance Authorization Scheme for the tea export. The enhancement of DTA sale limit of instant tea by EOU's unit from 30% to 50%. Extension of Vishesh Krishi and Gram Udyog Yojana scheme benefits to the export of tea. 10th, Handloom sector. To promote exports of handloom, specific funds are reserved under Market Access Initiatives (MAI) and Market Development Assistance (MDA). Permission is given for duty-free import of old pieces of hand-knotted carpets on consignment basis for re-export after repair. 11th, Agricultural and Village Industry. Vishesh Krishi and Gram Udyog Yojana to promote export of the Gram Udyog products, forest-based products, minor forest produce, agricultural produce and other products. Installation of the capital goods imported under EPCG scheme is allowed anywhere in AEZ. Permission given to the import restricted items such as panels under various export promotion schemes. 12th, Marine sector. Exemption to the fisheries sector from the maintenance of the average export obligation under EPCG scheme, fishing trawlers, ships, boats and other similar items. VKGUI scheme is also applicable to marine products. Additional flexibility is provided to marine sector under Target Plus scheme (TPS), duty-free certificate of entitlement (DFCE) scheme for the status holders. 13th, Pharmaceutical sector. Extension of export obligation period for advance authorizations issued with 6 APA as units from 6 months to 3 years. 14th, Electronics and IT hardware manufacturing industries. Assurance of speedy clearance of approvals needed from DGFT. Promotion of exports of electronics and IT hardware through utilization of MAI or MDA schemes by exporters or associations. 15th, Sports goods and toys. Permission for duty-free imports of specified specialized inputs to the extent of 3% of FOB value of exports of preceding financial years. Under MAI or MDA scheme, this sector shall be treated as priority sector. To promote exports, specific funds are reserved under MAI or MDA scheme. Sports goods and toys are considered as special focus products and qualified for the higher incentives. 16th, Directorate of Trade Remedy Measures. Establishment of the Directorate of the Trade Remedy Measures to provide support to Indian industries and exporters. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. The foreign trade policy is a framework that gives direction to the exports and imports of a country. It is also called export-import policy. In India, foreign trade policy is announced by Ministry of Commerce and Industry of Government of India for 5-year period. Foreign trade policy is very significant for economic development of the countries. Through foreign trade policy, developing countries get to know about the development of the developed countries. This creates urge in developing countries to expand their knowledge and experience. By this, developing countries focuses on the factors that makes development possible. In India, in post-independence period, the focus is on achieving the economic self-reliance. Ever since the mid-1950s, import substitution formed an integral part of India's foreign policy. Import substitution means replacing the imported goods by the domestically produced goods. In July 1991, major liberalization of the foreign trade policy came. Devaluation of rupee, abolition of import licensing on majority of goods, replacement of the cash subsidies to exporters by partial convertibility of the rupee, etc. were the major components of this policy reforms. The foreign policy of India is built around two major objectives: to ensure double increase in the country's share of the global merchandise trade within next 5 years. Second, to act as an essential device of economic growth by giving an impetus to the employment generation. Foreign trade policy came into the force in August 2009.